Chris Wesseling of Rotoworld and NBCSports.com. He talks fantasy football for the websites. Join me on the Sports Buffet podcast. Some receivers you ought to take, we look at that. Strategy of drafting, we look at that. Quarterbacks, Tony Romo, Matt Schaub, are they good picks? We look at that. It's Chris Wesseling on the Sports Buffet podcast.
Always love to have Chris Wesseling on to talk some fantasy football. He writes for NBCSports.com as well as Rotoworld.com. And Chris, our fantasy drafts are upon us. They have either begun or are getting ready to begin. And for those that are getting ready to begin, let's start with a position that seems to be more and more popular now, the wide receivers. Who do you see having maybe a breakout season this season catching the football?
I really like Eric Decker from the Broncos. I know the popular guy there is Demaryius Thomas because he's more physically gifted. He's more of a big play threat, and everybody perceives with Peyton Manning going there that Thomas will blow up this year. But I think Decker he's a better athlete than people believe. He reminds me a lot of kind of a souped-up Austin Collie who Manning loved to throw to in Indy. And I think their rapport was so strong in training camp. Beat writers are calling for 90 to 100 receptions. Peter King mentioned that Decker should be among the league leaders in receptions this year, and I really like him as the breakout guy, going from a guy who was maybe in the 30s and 40s at receivers to a guy who will flirt with the top 10.
With that being said, though, do you still, take a shot at Thomas, though, if you can get him to, or, is it Decker first, then Thomas?
Yeah, I don't have any problem with drafting Thomas. I just prefer Decker. I have more confidence in him on a consistency basis and staying healthy, too. Thomas has just he's had problems with his foot since he entered the league, so I think he's more of a injury wild card.
Do you think it's easier for receivers to have that breakout season with a new quarterback, or do you think that there are still some receivers out there who have had their quarterback there, 1, 2, maybe even 3 years to be able to have a breakout as well?
I think intuitively we would think if you develop a rapport with a guy, if you have that chemistry over a number of years, maybe it clicks. But I think, with a guy like Decker and with Thomas, they're both talented enough to produce as quality fantasy guys, but you're going from a quarterback like Tebow who, kind of only does one read and isn't very accurate, so you're not going to have as much fantasy success, to a guy like Peyton Manning. If you look at Decker in the first 5 or 6 games last year with Orton at quarterback, he was a top 10 or 15 guy then.
A friend of mine was in a keeper league, and he had Tony Romo and dropped him, and now he would almost have to either pick Romo back up, or go for a guy like a Matt Schaub. What's he better off doing?
I think that one's a no-brainer. You have to get Romo back. Schaub is no longer a quarterback one type anymore. That's a run-first offense, and they're playing really stout defense in Houston, too. They're not getting in the shootout. So you're not going to have, I believe Schaub only had 2 300-yard games in 10 games last year. He's no longer a guy you're going to run out there every week. Romo still is a guy you can run out there every week.
In terms of Romo, where do you, obviously I think the top 3 just off the top of my head probably are Rodgers, Breeze, and Brady. Maybe you can flip the order around a little bit if you want to. Where's Romo, though?
Well, I think after those 3 guys, you're going to have Vic, Cam Newton, and Stafford in whatever order you want.
Right.
I think Matt Ryan's ready to join that group. So, to me, there's a down there that you feel really confident in, and Romo's right outside that group. I guess you could say he and Matt Ryan are in a tier, maybe with Eli Manning, Peyton Manning, Rivers, that group right there.
You talked about Matt Schaub, in Houston. Does that make Andre Johnson less appealing now as well?
I think what makes Andre Johnson less appealing is 2 hamstring injuries last year, a groin injury to start training camp this year. He's getting older. I think it's the injuries and age more so than the fact that they're a run-first offense. When they pass, it is going to Andre Johnson.
Washington Redskins and running backs. And running backs and Mike Shanahan don't go well for fantasy owners a lot of times. Terrell Davis was obviously an exception, but once they got TD out of there, it became not a fun situation for fantasy owners. If you had a 10-foot pole, would you even touch a Redskins running back?
Good question. I don't think I would devote even a running back 3 slot to a Redskins running back. If they were still maybe in the 10th or 11th round, if you still saw Halou maybe I can get, throughout the season, I might be able to get 1 or 2 starts out of the guy. Because honestly, the worst thing about Shanahan's tendencies is you run a guy out like Hulu out there, yard game, and then he rides the pine the next game. So that's what really ends up hurting you with the Shanahan backfield. So I don't know if I'd go as far as a 10-foot pull, but I'm gonna guess that somebody in the league is gonna draft them before I do.
Talking about a guy real quick that I didn't mention when we were talking earlier, Ryan Matthews. If you had Ryan Matthews, I won't mention any names, I do, would you be worried about a Week 1 start, or do you think he's okay?
I would definitely be worried about a Week 1 start. I would advocate still drafting him. I think he's going to fall further than what his value is. I think he'll still produce like a stud when he's in the lineup. I just don't think you can. There's no way you can say yes, he will be available for Week 1.
Durability though throughout the season concern you, or not really?
Somewhat. I mean, I've tried to predict injuries, and I haven't been able to do it, nor have been able to find anyone else who can accurately predict an injury. So I kind of chalk that up as something I can't control. So I want the guys who do produce like a stud when they are out there, and I think he's going to be one of those guys.
Is there any running back that you maybe can see having a breakout season, or somebody that we might not think of off the top of our head that might be a back brain type of guy that might have a good season?
Let's see. Got coming a new guy to that group, maybe a Doug Martin from the Buccaneers. I guess DeMarco Murray had a few games last year where he was a stud, so he wouldn't count, but I could see him joining that stud group too.
When we look at Sam Bradford, he was a guy that was drafted with the number 1 pick several years ago. Is he worth a pick right now in an 8, 10, or 12-team league as a quarterback? I know obviously not a quarterback 1, but what about even a 2 or 3?
I think Rotoworld has him ranked 25th or 26th at quarterbacks, which tells you that we would not draft him in any of those types of leagues, not even in a 12-team league. I think when you look, he's probably got the worst offensive line situation in the league. He's got one of the worst wide receiver situations in the league, and the Rams have let it be known that they're going to be a run-heavy team this year. And then you throw in the fact that Bradford started to show signs of being scared in the pocket last year. He's developing bad tendencies. His ankle's still not 100%. I think there's just a lot of guys with higher upside than him.
With that being said about the Rams being a run-heavy team, how early would you go grab Steven Jackson?
I kind of like him this year. I've soured on him the past few years, but he looks like he's kind of rejuvenated. He likes the coaching change. He's in great shape. And, it really takes a major, major injury to get him off the field. I mean, he's just a beast. So I think we have him in the 10-11 range at running back. So still a guy that you might have as a borderline running back 1.
Tight end situation. I think a lot of people probably have the same 2, probably in this order, but they might have Jimmy Graham ahead of Rob Gronkowski. Where do you take those guys if you're picking, and, who's 3?
Okay, their average draft position right now is about mid-second to late second. So if you want Graham or Gronkowski, that's where you're going to have to go about mid-second round. I think that might be just a tad bit earlier than I'd want to go for a tight end. Maybe if they're still there in the early third, I would consider it. Third tight end, I've got Antonio Gates and Aaron Hernandez neck and neck right there. I like the way all the reports that the Chargers camp say Gates looks phenomenal. He's healthier than he's been in 3 or 4 years. I really like him, especially with Vincent Jackson gone. They're probably going to lean on him a little bit more. And Hernandez is kind of just like the forgotten stud in New England. He's still one of the youngest players in the league 3 years into his career. And, if he missed 2 games last year with the sprained MCL and still finished as third highest point scorer at tight end. So he's a legitimate stud.
I wanted to ask a follow-up on the tight ends real quick, but coming back to San Diego, with Jackson gone, are Floyd and or Meacham attractive to you?
Not really. I guess I would go with Meacham if I had to pick, but I'm not so sure that Vincent Brown might not even emerge as the guy to own there. So I like him as a late-round flyer. We just don't know how that pecking order is going to shake out yet. There's a lot of uncertainty.
Talking about some fantasy strategy real quick, what's your strategy normally in terms of, tight ends? We talk about those guys, but if you have in the first 1, 2, maybe even 3 rounds, with the way fantasy goes nowadays and with the way the NFL is, do you like to get that running back first still just because it seems like there are so few of them, or would you rather have that stud quarterback?
My strategy is, and always has been, just get the best player that's still left on the board regardless of position. I never understand those strategies that say you have to go running back or you have to go quarterback. I would not want to be rigid going into a draft.
Right.
Because I think the best way to draft is to take that best value on the board. So I think you're fine in any position, and really my advice to people is, it's your team, it's your hobby. If your gut tells you to go strongly for one guy and they're pretty even with another guy, don't factor in the position, just go with your gut, because he's not going to be back around the next time you draft.
Where do you feel, though, the least depth is in terms of you got to get a running back or you got to get a quarterback or whatever by round 3 or 4 to where you just can't totally, it's not like baseball. I mean, you can't punt a category, so to speak, in fantasy football.
Right, I think we've seen a shift there. I think, in the old days, there might have only been 7 or 8, like stud wide receivers, and you had to get one there by the end of the third round. And now we're really to the point where you might only have a handful of running backs that you're comfortable with as your running back one. So if you're scared of not having a running back by the third round, that's a position you should really address.
Preseason football, I don't think a lot of people put a ton of stock in it. They're just happy to see football again. Have you seen anything in the first couple weeks, though, or anything that would make you change any fantasy projections or fantasy strategy?
Yeah, that's a good point. I really can't stand preseason games. They're very hard to watch. It's hard to get into them. You think you're going to be excited, and within 5 minutes you're bored. But I have seen a few things. I really love what I'm seeing from the Falcons. Not just talent-wise, but we're seeing a scheme change and emphasis on the pass now. That team's going to run through Matt Ryan, not through the power running game with Michael Turner. Ryan has thrown 34 times over the first 2 preseason games to 8 rushes for Michael Turner, and I think that's a clear changing of the guard. I love Julio Jones. He's probably my favorite player in the league this year. I'm going to have him on all my teams if I can get him. I think his upside is just through the roof. And I think the Ravens are doing a little bit of that, too. You're going to see they're going to go no-huddle a lot more than you're used to. I don't know that I want Flacco as a top 12 quarterback, but I kind of like that passing game a little bit more than we have in years past. And one last thing, I was really impressed with Andrew Luck. I know that he's going against the Colts defense in practice every day, so the reports might look a little bit more glowing than it should be, but he just looks like the real deal. He's going to have to throw a ton with that defense, so it wouldn't be a surprise to me if he finishes a top 10 fantasy quarterback.
I take it if you're playing in a keeper league, then obviously you draft Luck. But if you're in a keeper league too, are there any rookies that you like that much?
Oh yeah, I think Luck and RG3 are both legit. I think 2 of the best talents to come to the league since Adrian Peterson and Calvin Johnson came in together. So I love them. I still like Trent Richardson, even with the knee surgery. I don't like him quite as much in redraft leagues, but still in keeper leagues. And I really like Kendall Wright of the Titans. Even in a redraft league with Kenny Britt status up in the air, he's got some value. And I think he's one of those guys going to be explosive slot receiver type like a Percy Harvin.
Anybody you see at the position of wide receiver that people are picking big numbers from, and Chris Wesseling just does not get it?
I thought long and hard about this question, and most of the receivers that people have ranked in the top 10, 15, 20, you're going to be able to count on him. The one guy I don't understand why he's going in the top 5 is Brandon Marshall. I see him right in that 5-6 category, and I kind of shake my head, and I look at the stats, and he only scored more than 7 touchdowns in one of the 6 seasons. He's going to a new team, which receivers don't generally fare too well going to new teams. And we know he's generally been a quarterback killer, a coach killer, and could end up in jail at any time. So to me, I don't want Brandon Marshall on my team. That's kind of a head-scratcher.
Yeah, it's a real bummer when you say the guy could end up in jail. So, I mean, that's kind of a stay away from sign. Final question for you, Chris. Always appreciate your time. We look forward to doing this again much more throughout the season for some sits and starts and things of that sort. But, you talk about the wide receivers, and you talk about Atlanta, and I think that's a great example, and obviously there are going to be others. But Atlanta's got Julio Jones, but they also have Roddy White, and Tony Gonzalez is not a dead horse, I don't think yet totally. In terms of teams like that, to where they have multiple options and they're multiple good options, how do you kind of play that in terms of drafting?
I get this question a lot. To me, it's a total non-factor if I end up with more than one guy from an offense. Yeah, with the caveat, of course, that it has to be a high-scoring offense. You expect it to be one of the better offenses in the league, which I do expect the Falcons to be. I don't want more than one guy from a low-scoring offense, but to me, I think people think way too much. They worry way too much about having a couple of guys from the same team. Production is production to me.
Chris, as always, appreciate the time. We look forward to doing it again pretty soon in Rotoworld and NBCSports.com. We'll definitely be checking it out.
Okay, thank you, Bob.